Good afternoon, everyone. Disease and water bogging. Stripe rust seem to be the name of the day across the United States. Let's take a look. Maine blueberry crop, disease and lack of pollination. Soils in Illinois, cooler and drier in mid-August. Wait, I thought it was supposed to be a heat wave to end all heat waves across the U.S. And we do have a final test case here in California during the extremely wet springtime, so you can see exactly what's going to happen as we enter into each successive spring going forward. Leaf rust, disease, waterlogging, and decreased crop yield. And while you're watching the video, please remember to subscribe to Adapt 2030 and click that bell so you can stay subscribed to get the latest updates. And this video is brought to you by foodforliberty.com/Adapt 2030. Heirloom vegetable seed kits, enough to grow 10 full acres. Click on the link below to see what else they offer in the description box. And yet another day, another video demonetized. That was 2 out of the last 3. So I had those 2 videos removed and look at the view count, 16,000, 8,700. And then what seems to happen is suddenly after I request the review, and then after the videos run for 3 or 4 days, then they decide to monetize it. It's just economic censorship by this private company, YouTube. On to the Maine blueberry crop. Falls with disease, lack of pollination. This is the types of conditions that you're going to expect moving into the grand solar minimum. Northern Ontario, Central Ontario experiencing the exact same thing. Maritimes in Canada. Northeast U.S., cooler and wetter than normal this year. Long story short, they're going to cut the crop by 36% this summer. Now, we knew what happened with the peach crop after all the blooms had come out, and then the Arctic front came and froze everything and killed off, 87% of the peach crop this year across the southeast United States. And remember how you've been hearing that August is this all-time scorcher month? Well, let's look in Illinois. The soils are cooler and drier in mid-August. It takes a lot of energy to heat soils or cool soils compared to what it takes to heat or cool the air. So if they're showing cooler temperatures, this would be weeks in the making, which makes me question all these reports of exceptional heat-breaking records all through these same areas, Illinois, Ohio. Why are the soils cooler? So the soil temperatures at the depths of 4 inches under the sod, 75.8 degrees. And that is 1.2 degrees below the long-term average and 4 degrees lower than the same period from last year. And that is the soil that's under the sod. So you should be asking yourself, if it's cooling the soils, where are these hot temperature records coming from if the soils are cool? Jump over to AgFacts Weekend e-crop news. You know, with this hurricane that just came across Texas, the rice and cotton are going to be devastated. You've seen the amount of rain coming down. That's an atmospheric compression event, hurricane. There's a couple nuggets in here that I wanted to point out. The whitefly continues to plague Georgia and Alabama due to stressed cotton due to unusual cold temperatures during the spring. Southern soybeans, the red-banded stink bug, stealing yields because stressed plants. And that was from soggy soils because the rain seemed to have stayed around for an extra 6 to 8 weeks with exceptional amounts on top of breaking records into these fields. And now you can definitely expect a reduction in the rice harvest coming out of the United States. So when you're looking at trends to try to figure out what the crop losses are going to be moving into the future, year upon year, here's a perfect example. This is from April of this year, after that incredibly soggy, record-breaking snowfall across California, record-breaking rains throughout the spring, and cooler temperatures. So when we add all this up, we're going to start to see more of this across the entire crop-growing belts of the northern and southern hemispheres. So let's start with wheat, because this is going to be one of the ones that will be stressed the fastest. Stripe rust. This is a newsletter from the California Wheat Commission. They're talking about a new type of stripe rust hitting the Durham wheat crop, specifically targeting the genes that had previously been resistant to this, which means that the plants were stressed, they were sick, their immune systems were down. So of course, new disease can be prevalent and take over fields and areas. And then on top of that, leaf spots. These are basically limited to small grains and fungal diseases, tan spot, greater prevalence in Durham wheat than the common trial. Okay, so now we got two types of disease, leaf spots, leaf rust hitting the wheat crop. So what does it look like? And they used to say medical terminology that you would use for your body. Lesions, spotting on the Durham wheat. This also affects the yield and the protein content. Close up here for you. And then you have to ask yourself, how much additional fungicide are they going to be spraying on these crops to try to mitigate this outbreak, if it can be mitigated at all, because there's a new strain, as you saw last year, sweeping through the Middle East that's uncontrollable. It's a super rust strain. And then we look at the susceptibility rate with these new fungal and spot diseases coming out. Okay, looking at 100% susceptibility. And these different type of cultivars, the Kronos, Kofa, Westbred 881, and the Desert King. So when we start to talk about moving and shifting grow belts, here is one specific species, Miwok, that was not affected at all. So if I'm going to be growing and shifting, I'm probably going to choose that one. So which company has those seeds? Some more images here of the leaf spot, how they break it down in coloration, size, and the symptoms. And some of the areas that were hit as well. Jumping over to waterlogging in wheat, you can only imagine what kind of yields are going to come out of these fields. And then don't forget about barley and oats. These are two other major crops that are grown in the United States. But here's what happens with waterlogging in barley. And then after it does dry and recover, which in the end results in lower crop yields. So we're starting to see this across so many areas of the globe right now with these wet conditions. And we saw this in the spring, the incredibly wet conditions up in Canada, in the east, a bit drier out west in some drought areas. France and Germany, parts of Europe, soggy. So when you look at the rosy forecast by agencies such as the USDA that say, hey, we have planted 100,000 acres of this, refer back to this video and then see how much of the crop is damaged, waterlogged, fungal, leaf spot, rust, or whatever it is to decrease the yield off that. So, you know, the figures they're using from 10 years ago with 100,000 acres planted per bushels, for example, if we're using wheat, compared to today's yield, that same 100,000 acres is not going to yield the same amount per acre, nor will it have the same protein content specifically in wheat. So there's a lot of changes coming up. So the old paradigm we used to use to measure, you know, crop output in the agricultural sector is going to have to be updated and changed to reflect these grand solar minimum changes. And I really do hope that this gives you a good gauge of what we're facing when we talk about just the damage to the crops that are grown in the regions that are grown now. Forget the cold damage that's coming. Leaving everything where it is right now, you can see the damage that will come to the crops and is coming to the crops, and it's just going to exacerbate and increase specifically next year. And into 2019, we'll start to hit into the tip of that cold damage on top of these waterlogged and different kind of fungal damage. Appreciate you watching the video. If you found any value in this, please consider supporting me on PayPal or Patreon. And I also do the weekly podcast, Mini Ice Age Conversations. And you can find a rundown here of the social media that I'm starting to post to, and my website, oilseedcrops.org, where I do host a few other additional tidbits with the Global Cooling page that has 100 different resources for you to get started on your own research.